So I used to work as a hospital chaplain, and I like to talk about religious things here on stage because, and I've said this before, it makes us young folk uncomfortable, which I enjoy. So first, a little bit, what it means to be a chaplain in a hospital. A lot of you probably think I'm really Christian because of that, because it's often associated with Christianity. But a little background, all chaplains in hospitals are non-denominational. Is it me making that sound? Breathing into the mic? Moving on. Lefroig. So I worked as a hospital chaplain for 1 year in Montreal, and essentially what that job is, and when you become a chaplain, you train for the job on your first day. There's no training in advance. So you just show up, you meet your other colleagues, and then you get your floor of your hospital, and then you begin to chaplain around. At that time, I was the youngest chaplain in Canada, which sounds like it's like a really big accomplishment, but it was really terrible, and for a really good reason, that there were no other young chaplains, because it's incredibly difficult. You're essentially accompanying people often through the death process and working with their families, and really oftentimes working with the doctors. You're an advocate for patients. Sometimes the doctors, you try and be an advocate. They don't look at you or talk to you, or they mostly just think you're a patient that's escaped because you're like wearing colors and have a look of concern. But it's a phenomenal job, and it's also incredibly challenging. And that was about, 6 years ago. So working as a chaplain when you're in your mid-20s, living in Montreal on the plateau in a super cool apartment, and mostly all my friends were in art school. And so my roommate was in art school at the time, and my day is that I would come home from chaplaining, often just like completely just heartbroken. I mean, it was a really, really heartbreaking job in a lot of ways. I wasn't spiritually equipped myself to handle some of the things that I saw in the day. And so I'd have a scotch every night. Tonight I've had 3. It was a really hard job. That's actually when I started drinking scotch. And so I'd come home every day from work, and I'd ask my roommate, I'd be like, hey, how was your day? And she'd be like, so good. I learned how to felt. And I was like, and she'd been doing that for 6 hours. She'd be like, what did you do? How was your day? And I'd be like, oh, and I would start to tell people my stories from my day, I was on call, and I'd have to sleep at the hospital sometimes. So you have these 2-day shifts where you're on call for these different kinds of crises. And I'd tell her some stories, which I won't tell you now because they're too sad. And I learned from telling her that people don't want to hear about them. So there's not a ton of fun stuff to talk about when you're a chaplain and all your friends are in art school. The only really fun thing that happened consistently was there was this guy who, I can't even remember his name. He was super cute, and his job was to wheel people who had just died to the morgue. It's really important. You do that job. It's really intense. So he had a sense of humor. You have to in our industry. And he would always hit on me, and he'd always be like, hey, how's it going? And be like, good, and I'd be like, you probably just want to keep going because you have a person, He'd be like, they're not going anywhere. And it was hospital banter. And I was always so charmed. And so that happened. But, then that petered out after he called me 17 times one weekend. And I was like, I was worried about where he wanted to meet for the date. He had keys to things. Anyways, I said no. Nothing interesting happened for a long time. And on my floor, I was based on internal medicine, which is just all different kinds of people. I had a lot of people that were either going to be transferred to hospice care or that were going to have the end of their life in the hospital. And what really, really broke my heart in that job was seeing people that were very, very old that had nobody, that had no friends, that had no family, they were completely alone. And that's when the job of the chaplain becomes even more important, because you just have all this time to sit and kick it with people and hang out with them. And some people don't want it at all, and others do. And the people that get most neglected are those that for various medical reasons have to essentially be in isolation. And so when you're a chaplain and you're making your rounds and you kind of pop into the room and you say hi and see what's up with everybody, it's really annoying to have to suit up and wear gloves and a mask, and you have to essentially cover yourself so you don't infect the person, And so a lot of chaplains, this is some inside scoop of the juicy chaplain world, You're on bated breath. They'd skip over those rooms because it was kind of a pain, and often those people were too sick to engage with you. So you'd kind of be like, oh, should I go in there or not? And I would always go in because I'm an exceptionally good person and was exceptionally, exceptional. So there was this one time when I went into this room all geared up, and the woman, we had several visits together, and at first she would just yell at me for about 20 minutes straight. She probably weighed like 80 pounds. She was extremely old. She was she was dying from a lung disorder. And she thought that she would have hallucinations based on this medication she was on. And so when she was hallucinating, she thought I was her granddaughter who had abandoned her and would just sit and yell at me. And so I would just take that for a while because it's also important, things get aired out, and we started to develop a relationship, and sometimes she recognized me, sometimes she didn't. And one day I come in and she was telling me that she was really grateful that I had advocated to the doctors for her because they switched her medications so she wasn't hallucinating anymore. Because imagine you're alone in a room with nobody and you're like seeing things. She used to explain to me the things that she saw, and she didn't enjoy these hallucinations. And so we started to become friends again. Something switched. She started yelling at me again, but I mean like straight violent yelling for 20 minutes. Then we had about 15 minutes of silence. And then without speaking, she pulls from her invisible pocket an invisible bag that she opens and proceeds to cut up and roll an invisible joint. She's like 1,000,000 years old, like the oldest person I've ever seen. And she's doing it just how like my friends do it. I'm just like, or like how my friends did it in high school. I don't even know anybody that has those kinds of tools anymore. You know what I mean? Just like those like grinder things, and like she had everything available to her, all invisible. She's like cutting up her weed, and this whole process takes a long time, but I'm just sort of watching. We're not exchanging a word. She rolls her joint. Invisible lighter from the other pocket, lights her invisible joint, and begins to smoke it. And then after a while, she passes it to me. I'm just like, I'm in isolation. Nobody's coming in. It's invisible. But I'm still questioning. I'm like, the ethics of the chaplain, like, can you smoke? Can you get fake high with your patient? You totally can. We proceed to pass our invisible joint back and forth in complete silence. I get crazy stoned. Like, I'm not even kidding. It's not even for funny. I'm just like, I totally see what you're talking about. There is shit on these walls. Like, I'm just sitting there with this woman. We don't exchange words. Can you imagine a woman passing you, a dying woman passing you an invisible joint? How am I going to say no to that? That's like against my code as a chaplain and as a spiritual caregiver, because the purpose is to spiritually connect. And what better way than with, the herbs? So we share the joint. I pass it back to her. I was done. I had had enough. And then she takes out her invisible roach clip and like sucks back just the last little bit, saves the roach in her invisible plastic bag, puts it back. And that was it. I sat there with her for a while because I was like, I can't go out now. And I go see other patients all fucked up. Like, I have some sense of decorum. I'm wearing gloves and a mask. I took my mask off to smoke, by the way. I was like, I might be infecting this woman with something I caught from someone else. It's totally worth it. She's on her way out. It was one of the very best moments I had as a chaplain. It was super profound, a little bit strange. And I didn't tell any of my colleagues that that happened because they were really square and boring. But I gotta say, man, if you're gonna go out, smoke the invisible joint before you do, because this woman looked pretty blissed. It was actually the last time I saw her. She died very soon after. She was actually alone when she passed. So I was really, really blessed to share that super bizarre moment with her. That was my story. Thanks.